Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Russell Matthews here, and at this point I'm pretty sure you've probably heard about the huge controversy going on right now, and that has to do with the CRA sending letters out to tons of Canadians saying that they may have to repay the entirety of their CERB payments, and that could be up to $14,000. Now the problem is that some Canadians are saying that the requirements for receiving the CERB weren't clear from the outset, and that rules may have changed over the course of these past months, so is it really fair for them to be required to pay this money back? And that's how the story goes. But as of right now, there's even more information that's coming out that's new, that's sort of altering the way that we're perceiving this conflict. The Prime Minister has been relatively silent about this problem over the past week, but I did some digging to find out what he has said about it in the past. So in this video we're going to talk about that, and also there were some new emails that were sent by the CRA, or the Canada Revenue Agency, and they sent emails to CBC News, and it sort of outlines where they stand and what their position is about this issue. And on top of that, there's even more political pressure around this topic because the NDP just yesterday held a press conference talking about what they would do to solve the problem. And we also heard from the Minister of Employment with the Liberals, who's sort of trying to make it sound like things aren't quite as bad as they seem. So we're going to talk about all of those topics and all of those updates in today's video. It's my goal with this channel to bring information to you about Canadians and their money as quickly and as accurately as possible so that you can set yourselves up to live a more financially stable future. So if you're interested in that and you want to stay updated with all of these stories, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. All right, now let's get into this new information. So first off, as I was saying, the Prime Minister has been relatively silent on this issue over the past week as it's picked up more and more media coverage. But I went back and I took a look at a question period, which is something that happens in the House of Commons when it is in session, where the opposition parties are sort of grilling Trudeau about this issue. Let's take a look at exactly what he said in this question period video. So before this point in the video, he had been talking about how it was important for them to get funds out to Canadians as quickly as possible, whether it's a business or an individual. And let's continue from here.
And as we've said, we are verifying things on the back end. We're making sure that people didn't take advantage of it, but people who made good faith mistakes, Mr. Speaker, will not be penalized. Our focus during this year has been to be there for Canadians, and that's what we've done.
Okay, so the interesting thing there he's saying is that people who applied in good faith won't be penalized. Now, that word penalized is a little bit subjective, right? Some people would say that being forced to pay this back when the rules may not have been clear, that could be penalized. But I think the context in which he's saying this is that there won't be any added interest or charges if you applied in good faith. Now, I'm pretty sure that the Conservative leader has something to say about this.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
But the Prime Minister is penalizing average Canadians and helping major corporations. The government changed the criteria for the CERB so that people who took home more than $5,000 before taxes are now being assessed on their net income instead of their gross income. The website mentioned nothing about net, Mr. Speaker. Even after the changes, it still doesn't. Why is there one set of rules for Canadians working hard and struggling in the unemployment line and another set of rules for connected corporate liberal insiders?
Okay, so that's a very a typical sort of conservative spin on the question that we're all asking, right? We've been talking about, is it net income? Is it gross income? Which should be considered for this CERB eligibility? And he's put the added sort of spin on it that, okay, well, we've spent all this money on these other large corporations, and like, why was that money spent in the way it was? Let's see what the Prime Minister has to say.
The Honourable Prime Minister.
From the very beginning, we were clear on getting support out to Canadians. The rules did not change, but we've indicated to Canadians that we will work with them if people made good faith mistakes. We know that during this unprecedented time, we needed to be there for Canadians, and that is the choice we made. Now, the Conservatives have said we shouldn't have delivered as much money to Canadians as we did, but I know there's a lot of Canadians who look back on this year and understand that because we were all there for each other, it was a much less bad 2020. We're not going to call it a good 2020, but a less bad 2020 than it otherwise would have been.
Okay, so let's pull out a little bit of information from that. I think the main takeaway from that last statement is that he seems to be pretty firmly taking the stance that no rules actually changed from when people applied to now when they're being asked to pay it back in some situations. And again, it's kind of like we talked about in our previous videos on this topic. It's all has to do with the interpretation of the word income, right? Like, are we going to consider that income minus expenses, or are we just going to consider that as gross income, right? It wasn't really made entirely clear on the front page of the CRA website. And in addition to that, we also saw Bill Morneau, the finance minister at the time, use the word revenue, which is expenses not taken away, to explain who would be eligible. So it was definitely not clear, and it's interesting they're taking this stance that no rules ever changed. And that's the exact same stance that the CRA has taken recently. Now, over the past week or so, the CRA has been reportedly sending emails to CBC News to sort of talk about this issue, and that's one of the things they made clear, among other things. So let's take a look at that CBC News article to see what the CRA themselves as an agency has to say. So here's the CBC article that I'm talking about, and the headline, as you can see, is CRA sent 441,000 educational letters to Canadians who may have to repay the CERB benefits. This is interesting because it's the first information that the CRA has given to us about how widespread the problem might be. Later in the article, it talks about how this amounts to about 5% of everybody who applied for CERB, which was a lot of Canadians, 441,000 people. That's a lot to consider. And also, I'll erase that so you can read it, education letters. So that's a different framing of what these letters were. When people received the letters, they sort of were very anxious about it, as most people would be if they received a letter that suggested they might need to pay back $14,000 they weren't expecting to repay. But let's get more into the details of exactly what the CRA sent to the CBC in an explanation of this. At this point in the article, they say that, described as education letters by a CRA spokesperson, the letters were sent to those for whom the agency said it was unable to confirm employment and or self-employment income of at least $5,000 in 2019 or in the 12 months prior to the date of their application, one of the key criteria for the CERB program. This gives us a little bit of insight about who these letters were actually sent out to. Now, it's not seeming like if you were sent this letter that 100% guaranteed you'd be required to pay this back, right? They say that it was only sent to people who they were unable to confirm that they made the $5,000. Now, that says nothing to whether or not they actually made the $5,000. It just says, hey, based on the information that the CRA has right now, you're somebody who could have to pay this back. Now, that doesn't really help with the whole net gross situation, but at least it is a little bit of solace for people who were thinking, you know what, I do qualify, but they still sent this to me, right? At least you know that maybe it's just the fact that they don't have the information to confirm this, not that you actually have to pay it back. Later on in the article, and this seems like it was coming from those emails that were sent to CBC News by a CRA spokesperson, they say that the CRA considers self-employment income as the net, keyword net, pre-tax income, gross income less expenses, and this is consistent with how self-employment income is calculated when dealing with the CRA. To be clear, there has been no change to this position during the life cycle of the CERB. Okay, so that gives you a pretty clear outline of what their stance is on this. So it seems now they're definitely using this word net as they talk about this issue. And they're saying that this is consistent with how they've done it in the past and when you're dealing with the CRA. However, if you're the average Canadian citizen, it's likely you're not really dialoguing or having to interact with the CRA on a regular basis. So maybe it wouldn't make sense that they would assume that you know this is how they view the gross income or the self-employment income number. And in this paragraph too, they're making it very clear that they're saying there was no change, there were no rule changes, despite what a lot of people are saying and claiming. Even major political party leaders are claiming that there has been a change. The CRA is saying, nope, there wasn't any change. This was the rules at the beginning, and this is the rules now. So interesting, they're taking that sort of same stance that Justin Trudeau also did in that question period that we watched. But, however, a CBC News search of archived internet pages shows that information was added sometime after April 21st, about 2 weeks after the program opened for applications. So any additional information that they did add was at the very least added a little bit after that first application. And as a final little bit of information that was in this article, it says that the CRA says that not everyone who receives a letter will be required to repay the CERB benefits. Recipients are encouraged to complete their 2020 tax returns to help the CRA correctly identify the benefits and credits to which they are entitled. The letter says that those who do owe CERB money are, again, that word, encouraged to repay by December 31st, and that's for tax filing purposes, not a repayment deadline as some people interpreted it. So it seems that the narrative that's been spun by a lot of these different news websites and these news broadcasters, that people are required to pay back all of their CERB right now before December 31st in the middle of the holidays, it makes for good news, but it seems that's not actually the case. People will likely still have to pay this money back, but there isn't the hard December 31st deadline on paying this back, and you won't have any penalty if you pay it back later. That's another thing that they've been sure to make sure everybody knows, is that there's not going to be any interest charged or any penalties if you applied in good faith. But, and this is depending on how things shake out, you're likely going to be required to pay for this if you didn't meet the eligibility requirements. And what they are saying is that you'll be able to set up a payment plan to do this, and also that they're not going to go through any sort of collection actions against you until it's responsible to do so. That's their words. Who knows when they're going to start this up, but it seems like it won't be for some time that you'll actually be 100% required to and penalized for if you don't pay this right away. So we've got Justin Trudeau taking the position that no rules changed, everything was clear from the get-go, and we've also got the CRA taking that same stance, but not all political parties are thinking this way. Obviously, you saw in the first question period video, but the NDP have actually been the ones that have most strongly opposed the way that this whole situation has been handled. So much so that Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, just yesterday held an online press conference talking about exclusively this issue. Now, I gave that press conference a listen, and I sort of extracted the points that are the most informational, and it actually, he gives a plan on what he would do to solve this problem if the NDP were in power, and this is sort of what he's pressuring Justin Trudeau to do. Again, that's the job of any sort of minority, or rather, that's the job of any opposition government, right? They're supposed to sort of pressure the government to make changes. So what he's saying here could make its way into actual policy. Let's take a closer look at it. So here's the press conference that I'm talking about, and we're going to hop around a little bit just so you get the most important information that has been sort of set out here. Let's listen.
This is exactly what's going on. We've got a Liberal government that, through great journalistic investigative reporting, is giving hundreds of millions of dollars. In some case, if you total all the all the private companies receiving public money, these are over $1 billion in public money going to companies that have turned around and laid off workers and made profits. And they took public money, laid off workers, made profits. The Liberal government seems to have no concern about them, not trying to go after those companies, these very powerful and wealthy companies. But then we've got independent workers who are just struggling to get by. These are people who are self-employed. They met the criteria as laid out by CRA, applied in good faith, only to receive weeks before the holidays a letter saying they've got to pay back a massive amount of money. This is wrong. The Liberal government has it all wrong. They're going after the wrong people. They're going after self-employed people who are just earning enough to get by, and letting powerful and wealthy companies that have taken over $1 billion of public money turn around, lay off workers, and make a profit. They're being let off the hook. And this is something that we cannot allow to continue. So
So there's a couple points in there, but this is definitely the most hardline response from a political party, right? If we take a little bit of a closer look at this, it seems that they're sort of, the NDP are taking this opportunity to sort of speak out about this issue, but also promote one of their major views that they've been talking about recently, and that's how they think it's a good idea to impose a wealth tax on the most wealthy people, and how there should be additional taxes for people and businesses that have prospered throughout the pandemic. Now, we're not going to get into whether or not that's a good idea or the problems with it. I actually made a video about that, so if you're interested in learning more about it, make sure to check out that link down in the description. But just like the Conservatives did at the beginning, it seems every political party is always trying to make their stance known about the current issue and also sort of spin it so that they can get some of their policies talked about on a more broad scale. And before we get into this next section of the video, at this point we know that the NDP, they're taking this hard line that there actually was a change in requirements, and that people who applied with their gross income in mind, they were in the right, and this whole gross net income situation is actually something that is real and isn't something that people are just making up to try to be eligible when they weren't. They're saying, hey, the government screwed up. This is their fault, not yours. You shouldn't be penalized. Let's hear what else he has to say about it.
Over 100,000 Canadians have received letters like this. People who applied in good faith, people who are self-employed, people who followed the rules. They are now being penalized. They're being faced with these letters. It's incredibly scary. And it's absolutely clear that when we were in Parliament, we wanted to prevent this from happening. So we put in place a motion that said that no one who applied in good faith would be penalized. Well, now that motion passed unanimously. Now it looks very clear that we've got people who applied in good faith that the Liberal government's going after. And this is wrong. The Prime Minister could fix this right now. The Prime Minister could send a directive right now and ensure people like John don't have to be so afraid right before the holidays. Make sure they know that, you know what, people who applied in good faith will not be pursued, will not be penalized. This has to happen right now, and it's essential that we do this.
So this is getting back to that sort of subjective word of penalized. What does penalized really mean? Is that meaning, like, should they not have to pay this back? Or, as Justin Trudeau seems to be saying, nobody should have to pay interest or should have to be charged if they applied in good faith, but they're still going to have to pay it back. Seems like the NDP is taking the stance on, if you applied in good faith, maybe you shouldn't have to pay it back at all. Now, there could be some issues with that, and later in this video, let's jump to it now. There's a spot where somebody who calls in with a question says, well, you said this is wrong, but what would you do about it? Let's listen to that.
I really appreciate that. This is a great opportunity to clarify. I really thank you for the question. What should happen right now is the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, should issue a directive very clearly stating that self-employed workers that have applied in good faith, and they have, should not be the subject of any scrutiny. If you've applied in good faith, and this is a question of net versus gross income, which is the big question. This is, did someone earn $5,000? They were told if they earned $5,000 in the previous year or the previous 12 months, that would be good enough to apply. Then they added in this confusion around what that means. That was never clarified, and people were told to interpret it as broadly as possible. Those people who qualified, but now are being retroactively told that, oh no, you know, there's a different definition we didn't tell you about. Those people should be given, there should be a directive by the Prime Minister to say, completely stop going after these folks. They should be notified that it's okay, you applied in good faith, you're okay. And instead of going after those folks, so there should be an immediate end to pursuing people that are self-employed, that applied for CERB. In fact, it's more than just good faith. They applied with the information they had, and they did the right thing. They are absolutely, in my opinion, given all the evidence out there, they applied, in fact, with all the information available, they applied appropriately. They should be told it's okay. They should be notified immediately. And Justin Trudeau should provide a directive to CRA to go after these wealthy companies that have made profits. That's what I'd like to see happen immediately.
Okay, so he was pretty clear about what he wants to see. However, there could be some issues with this, right? Like, what does this look like if everybody is required to, or like not required to pay back any money if they applied in good faith? What's to stop people who were actually acting in bad faith to just say, hey, I was also applying in good faith, I shouldn't be penalized, even though there are people out there who applied knowing full well that they weren't qualified for the benefits. Would this let those people sort of fall through the cracks, and is it worth it? That's something that you can think about yourself. So it seems like the NDP and also actually the Conservatives are united this time in saying that no, there actually was a change in qualification. People were qualified originally, and now due to a change in what's actually required of them, now they're being told they're not eligible. So it's not so often that we see the NDP and the Conservatives come together on some of these social issues, but here's one instance where they are. So there's a more and more political pressure mounting for something to be said or changed or done about this problem. But despite this political pressure from both of the major parties that are the opposition for the current government, we're not seeing much of a response from the Liberals in talking about how they see this issue. It's been pretty much radio silence. Remember that question period video from the beginning of this video was from all the way last Wednesday. So there hasn't been a lot to come out of the Liberal government. However, Carla Qualtrough, who is the Minister of Employment, I believe, just gave an interview to the Canadian Press, and in it she sort of echoes the sentiment of the CRA, saying, hey, things aren't as bad as they may seem. You're not actually required to pay this by December 31st. And these letters weren't an intimidation tactic or something to scare them. It was just an idea that the CRA had in order to make it less complicated come tax time, so that people who were required to pay this back weren't told that they have to pay tax on money that they may have to pay back in the end. So it's all a big mess, and we're going to need to hear something at some point about how this issue is going to be handled. And at this point, I think that's the best way that I can put it. It seems like this is just one big mess that needs sorting out, and who knows which way things are going to go. I'm sure there'll be more updates on this topic in the days and weeks to come. So if it's something you want to stay updated on, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, because I'm bringing updates just like this about anything relating to Canadians and their monies. Lately, we've been talking about these benefits and how they're affecting Canadians, but also on the channel, there's tips that can help you live a more financially stable life. So make sure to hit all those buttons if you're interested in that sort of stuff. And whenever there's sort of a complex problem like this where people have different stances, I always like to encourage you to drop a comment down there in the comments box. I read all of my comments and I sort of use it as a way to get an idea of what people who are watching these videos think. So if you want your voice to be heard, make sure to let me know what you think down there. And of course, if you haven't already done so, hit that like button, because when you hit that button, it spreads this video to people who might not have otherwise seen it. So I'd appreciate your help in growing this channel, and I'd also imagine that people who want to know about this would appreciate you sending the video their way. And with all of that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope these sort of update videos where I sort of take these pieces of news and put them all together for you are at least a little bit helpful, and I'll see you next time.